Okay, we're live. And yeah, welcome everyone. So we have a very exciting session for you today on finding value in machine learning. And the third installment of our FinML meetup. And really happy to have Byron here today to talk us through that. Some announcement before that. So we are here on a Zoom call, so please mute yourself during the presentation. And afterwards, unmute if you want to ask a question. And this is our third one. We try to make this a regular thing. So if you want to speak at one of these things as well, please reach out to me and we can arrange something. And with that, I want to hand over to Byron.
Thanks, Hendrik. Thanks for having me, everybody. Hope you're having a good evening. So the whole talk is going to be on finding value in machine learning. My name is Byron Allen. I'm a senior consultant and the ML lead at a company called Servian, which is a data and analytics company based in Australia. I know this accent doesn't sound Australian. It's not. I'm from the US, in case you're just wondering. So I came over here about 2 years ago to help set up the office in the UK. And my background is in ML, and I've helped Servian and gotten the chance to work on a whole lot of different engagements across the ML lifecycle. And that's kind of what I'll talk to you about today, but in particular, this one aspect of that lifecycle. So just a bit of background about me, so you have a sense of what I've been involved in. I've helped our company acquire Google Cloud specialization in machine learning. I'm an authorized trainer. You may have seen other articles written by me or seen other talks that I've given. One is called The Cheesy Analogy, and I've written a bunch on Medium, including one thing called On Finding Value in Machine Learning, which is really about this one framework that we've developed internally. And it's geared towards that first phase of the ML lifecycle. And so, sorry, I could hear some background noise from somebody's audio. So AccelerateML is a framework that is geared towards finding value in machine learning, which kind of comes into this question around discovery in this ML lifecycle. So probably all of you on the call, I imagine, are mostly involved in ML, but I understand there's probably a few people that are maybe more product managers or coming from another space. And I'll get to where I think everybody kind of has a role in this discovery phase. But the one thing I've found in my experience in kind of touching on a lot of different engagements throughout the life cycle is there's often a lot of focus spent on development, on deployment, and not as much on discovery, which makes a lot of sense because, you know, it's the beginning stage of any project, and you're not necessarily going to spend that much time. And because you're starting out there, you might not necessarily know where your journey is going to take you. And I know I've seen other clients and spoken to a lot of people, and there's a lot of experiences, and I'd be keen to hear what your experiences are in the Q&A session around the discovery process in your own place of work. But the point is, this talk is going to focus specifically on that. And I think it's good to take a step back and just kind of conceptualize it a little bit more. I break up the world of ML into two distinct ways of thinking. I think you're either looking at deriving business value or some kind of value for your organization, which that goes back to like defining use cases, working through problem statements, that kind of thing. And then there's the other side of it, which probably a lot of us are very familiar with, especially if you're an ML engineer. You're talking about this kind of more technical journey, this journey to ML ops. And at the end of the day, we're all trying to seek some sort of advanced capability, the ability to iterate through models quickly and find something that works and is performant, but also it needs to drive some sort of value for your organization. And what we've seen at Servian is wherever you are in your journey, you're starting at a certain point and you're trying to get to that advanced capability. When it comes to kind of moving vertically up this axis of driving business value, we see two types of clients: those that are very early on in their journey and they maybe haven't done ML before, and a framework like AccelerateML is really beneficial for them. Or those that have had some experience, maybe they have some technical capability, maybe they've picked off low-hanging fruit amongst the use cases within their domain, and now they need to have a more robust process for exploration around new ideas. And so that kind of covers off this space as well. And so AccelerateML is this framework. We kind of phrase it more generically as finding something that works and avoiding wasted time, because I'm sure many of you, if you've built models, it's very easy to go off and lose sight of things, which is to say, things can become endless research projects, and that's really something you don't want to do. You want to avoid that. And it's very helpful to have guardrails in place and a strict structure to help guide us forward. So the AccelerateML framework, it combines data science with design thinking at its core in an attempt to solve problems in a very time-boxed and rigorous manner. So if you think more generically about like Scrum, for example, not everybody has experience using Scrum, but from my own personal experience and many of my colleagues, it's been really useful in terms of building structure. And there's a lot of agile methods that attempt to build structure for teams. And this is attempting to do the same thing. It's building structure to move projects forward, specifically ones that have some sort of high risk or a lot of unknowns, which you do see a lot of in data science and ML work. And so one of the other key aspects of it is, besides that structure, is figuring out what a key business metric is for specific use cases and tying that back to performance. So whether you're driving some sort of change with people or process or some other new technology, tying a business metric back in is really important. And that comes together in some specific ways. So the mindset of AccelerateML is design thinking coupled with lean methodologies and agile methodologies, as I've kind of mentioned. And it stems out of this experience with business experimentation. You've probably heard of decision engineering and causal inference. And there's a lot of companies that talk about this, a lot of individuals that talk about it. And that's one aspect of AccelerateML, but there's another more kind of fundamentally aspect of the discovery step, which I'll focus on the most in this conversation. But anyways, experimentation is something that we've seen across a large number of clients, or not clients, but companies. And I'm sure you've seen plenty of use cases in that space as well. And so I hope this doesn't come across too much as a sales pitch. I'm really interested to get feedback and hear your own experiences, because you probably have similar processes in place, but there's always some different nuances that exist between different companies. But for Servian, our framework looks like this. We break it up into 3 phases. We have a discovery phase, and the basic premise of the discovery phase is as an output, you're going to have some sort of solution idea coupled with a business plan. You want to be able to define business metrics, and then once you've built out your POC, what's called MVP models, you want to be able to tie it back to that business performance. And so that's the discovery phase. It's working towards that. And I'll dive into a lot of more detail about what we do in that space and how we do it, because it is such a fundamental step towards getting things started and moving in the right direction. And it's very fundamental. The data science and engineering phase and deployment and experiment, I kind of feel like, given the audience, I don't want to tell you how to suck eggs, because I think you probably have a lot of experience in this space, but just very loosely, data science and engineering is a very time box exercise from our perspective. We always spend around 4 to 6 weeks, and it's very rigorous and regimented and time boxed in a very short way. And that's in order to force guardrails into the process. And it's always one model at a time. And that's the approach. And then you would push that into deploy an experiment, which is to say you run it in a pseudo production or production level environment, and you tie it back to that business metric that's defined in discovery. So you can kind of see how the discovery phase is super important. And this is what that looks like at a high level. We have 3 workshops, which are fundamentally grounded in an exit criteria. And then you have a final validate and plan stage. Ultimately, the outcome that you want in a discovery phase is you want a business plan, because you want to be able to go back to the business and secure further investment from them for the work that you're proposing, and which is why also business metrics, tying the work back to a business metric is really important. And also it sets the tone for the next phase and outlines, what are the tasks? What are you actually going to do? What's your backlog? And so that's the outcome of it. So the discovery phase starts with this unearth a problem workshop, where you're really trying to understand the business domain or the certain sector. And you're trying to work towards articulating a problem statement as best you can. And you might start with some problem statements. And one thing we've experienced is a lot of times people will have problem statements already, and that's great. And that's a great starting point. But further articulation of those problem statements is really key. And it's something that helps if you go through the process of kind of really digging in deep into into getting people to articulate those problems. You also start to go into a process of understanding where the priorities are. And so there is a prioritization exercise that becomes a part of this workshop. And one problem statement will rise to the top, which then filters to the next workshop, where the exit criteria of that one is then a single solution idea. And you kind of go through a very similar process using different exercises. But the key difference between these 2 workshops is this first problem statement exercise is very much centered around key stakeholders. So in other words, decision makers. But you have to then start to open up the workshop and the whole process to a much wider group of people. Because whatever you're developing, if say, you're developing something for a telecom that's related to like fraud or risk, you might need to involve some other teams that are related to customer experience as well. And so there's other domains, people from other domains that need to get brought in. They need to be both technical and business oriented in nature. So it's good to build a coalition of people in this ideation workshop. And that's what we aim to do. And so you get them to explore the solution space and then organize, prioritize solution ideas. And then it pushes forward into a third workshop where you're sitting there and you're validating the feasibility of probably the top 2-3 ideas that come out of the previous workshop. So you can see that each workshop has an exit criteria that leads into the next. And then there's this final validation step where you have somebody that goes through exploratory data analysis of the top idea. And so it's always focused on what is the single most prioritized idea that went along. And the reason for that is if you're focusing on one thing rather than many, it kind of helps the process move along. Data science and engineering, it's a very iterative process. I won't focus too much on this other than to say, this is where you're doing your prototypes, you're developing your code. This is where you get hands-on and you go through that iterative process of training and going through runs and evaluating those runs and understanding what kind of changes you have as you include more data into your training set, etc. Out the back of that comes an MVP model. And whatever performance you're seeing, you would then put forward some sort of change recommendation. That then goes into a very similar iterative process, but in a production environment where the model is tied to a business metric, not just a model performance metric, because that will tie it back to the actual business case. So to go back and focus more on the discovery workshops, this is kind of what we're looking at. We've broken them up into entry criteria and exit criteria, as I've mentioned before, but they're all consisting of a wide range of different exercises that are grounded in design thinking and lean methodology. So there's a lot of them that you may have heard of before: problem statement definition, 2x2 matrix, How might we? There's other things that kind of get brought in into some of these workshops depending on participation, such as like 6 thinking hats, worst possible ideas. There's a heap of design thinking exercises to draw upon. So if you're interested in this space, I would suggest looking at UX methodologies and trying to incorporate them into your ML workflows at an early stage, because that's where a lot of this kind of design thinking comes from, a little bit on the more UX side of things. With workshops, the way we break it up is we split it into 2, because what we've noticed is that participation is always key, and it can be challenging to get a hold of people. And once you have them all in the same room, virtually, or when COVID's over, maybe physically, it's hard to organize that. So you want to be able to get the most out of the situation. So we spend a lot of time, and it is very concentrated workshops that we develop as a part of this process. So for problem statements, we spend half a day to a day. Ideation is like 6 to 8 hours, and then impact is something like a full day. And this always goes back to how much time is needed and how much participation you're seeing from participants. Sometimes it's a little harder for participants to get involved because it's a new experience and maybe they're reluctant to share, and you got to sometimes find and pivot to the right exercise for the right people. So it depends on the validator and the people, and it's sort of a dance at certain times. We've tried to distill that into something that we've seen work in a lot of instances, but this is an area where it can be customized, and we've customized it for other clients as well. So factors that drive up complexity in this process are like in-depth understanding around problem spaces. This becomes a challenge, and I'll go back here and I'll just briefly touch on some of this. So the one thing I've found in Unearth a Problem is that if sometimes clients will come to this having some predefined ideas of what will work and before they start, which can be a good way of just kind of focusing the workshop. But sometimes there's also a relative need of openness towards new ideas and new problem statements that can help facilitate the creation of new problem statements. So being too tied to one idea can limit your ability to kind of move. And the next portion that we see is in this ideation workshop. This is where that broader coalition becomes really important. And because you get a lot of people in a room, sometimes you have to go through more exercises to get people to share and bring the best out, or bring out their knowledge and share with everybody. It's also the space where, again, that broader information from different business units is going to be critical. And if people are not able to join, it can sometimes hinder the process. Impact is where this becomes more of a technical conversation, where it's just purely people that are more familiar with the data and the data science approaches and systems that are involved. They'll kind of be able to validate solution ideas that are come forward. And so number of people involved, number of solution ideas that come out, and level of participation kind of all impact the overall process and how successful it is or is not. And what we found is in these workshops, having a really clear, a very, very clear agenda. And I'll show you an example of this is absolutely important, especially if we're looking at this work from home environment. There's also this mentality, we never go it alone, which is to say facilitators are a key component of this workshop, of all of them. And if you are there alone, you may miss certain things. So there's always 2 facilitators in the room to help each other out, because it's a lot to manage all at once, especially if you have 10, 15 people all sharing their ideas. Sharing of content is critically important. So after everything is done, after each workshop, ideas are shared back to the team so that they can rehash it, review it, and then come back to the next workshop energized and ready to think about what's next. And then of course recording, because you can write sticky notes and post them on a wall, post them on a Miro dashboard, but it doesn't always capture what people say or the tone and mood of the room, which can sometimes be really informative to this process. So I mentioned Miro just now. We use Miro dashboards as a way of facilitating workshops in this work from home environment that all of us are in right now. And it's been super successful at enabling these kinds of discussions. And I'll just share the dashboard with you right now, and hopefully you'll get a sense of what it looks like to be in a workshop like this, or what maybe you could build on your own terms in your own way. So this is what Miro looks like, and I'm keen in the Q&A maybe to see how many people have had experiences with Miro and doing things like this. But this is our Miro dashboard for the first workshop. And as you can see, you can quickly pivot around the dashboard through these frames. And that's just a quick way of showing people where to go. And it helps them get from one stage to the next. And it also just helps with creating a flow throughout the entire exercise and guiding people. So you might start with agenda, then we have something like a prep deck, some sort of explanation of what we're going to do today. So choosing a good business problem, which goes back to problem statement definitions. Icebreakers, a lot of times there are people who are participating who are not familiar with these kind of tools and they need to get caught up. So we have something there to help break the ice. And then that's when we get into exercises like in this specific workshop, it's built around corporate strategy, AI and ML strategy, data strategy that might lead into mapping initiatives that are done in the past, which helps to ground people in what they've currently done and start to explore this idea of why they do that. Particular in this scenario, you want to understand, are your past activities more geared towards revenue, or are they more geared towards trust, risk, reliability, or is it more about cost savings? And understanding where the focus is important, because you might want to lean into that or find some other opportunity. Then we go into problem spaces where it's broken into sub problems, and everybody gets to kind of add in their 2 bits, their 2 cents about problem statements. So everybody would get at the beginning in this icebreaker exercise, everybody gets their own color of sticky note, and then you can start attaching them to these problem statements and understanding what they feel is the problem statement in a more detailed manner. And then from there, you would start to take these sub problems and rank them in some way. And before this workshop ever starts, you might have conversations to kind of understand what are your priorities. You know, it's the common thing is value and complexity. It's a good way of ranking problem spaces or problems statements that you have and understanding where they lie. It's early on, it's easy to say something with some value and less complexity is what you want to aim for. But you know, as time goes on and low-hanging fruit disappears, you might have to find another way of evaluating what that is, because it's gone, and so you might have to figure out different axes to evaluate the problems, or you might have to figure out which axis you value more. And then this gets into the problem statement, which is really again, each step has a specific exit criteria that you're working towards. So you've defined what problem statements are maybe most important. You take those just 1 or 2 that are at the highest priority at this stage. So whatever comes out here, just select 2 of them, even if there's 20, and you workshop them together to articulate them as best you can and better understand what the problem statement is. And you know, that might look like what makes a good problem statement. There's a lot of schools of thought on that. Our thinking is that largely it's a combination of timing, impact, measurability, control, tractability, and priority. And what I've found is tractability and impact are the 2 that probably become the most important in terms of identifying what is able to move which problems will be usable as the grounding for a solution idea, because we tend to go for some ideas that are elaborate or cool or interesting, shiny, etc., but that doesn't make them tractable or impactable. So that's an example of a Miro dashboard that we use for the first workshop. And it's sometimes changed and customized depending on certain needs, but that's kind of what the basic one looks like. So again, why would you have or create a framework like this? It's to clarify and solve business problems at its core, to manage time box research activities and any kind of activity that is high risk, and that means it's very applicable to data science activities. And ultimately, you want to measure effective changes in business output. You want to tie everything together so that you can ensure that investment in it continues. So avoid wasted effort, prevents scope creep and wandering, steers project in the right direction, and works towards ensuring that you're documenting and measuring as you go, and framing the problem so that it is justified. So yeah, that's AccelerateML, and that's the chat pretty much.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I thought it was super interesting. Also some shout outs in the chat as well. So I really very much enjoyed it. Should we kick off the discussion? I already have a question. Can you maybe highlight the like which parts of this discovery process is like applicable to ML and to normal or other software engineering, and which part is like really related to data science, and where do you think it differs maybe a little bit?
Yeah. So I'll go back to presenting this and go back to one of the slides. So it's a good question, and we frame this as a AccelerateML. It's like, oh, this is an ML tool or framework, but I think the truth is it could be used for so many different things. We're currently in the process of exploring some use cases around satellite imagery analysis, and this is going to be used for that because it's dealing with the same concept of something that's high risk. And I think that's the difference, is if there's some aspect of a potential use case or challenge that might be high risk, then this process does become useful. There is also some separation when you're thinking about, for example, chatbots or any kind of bot where it has a conversational flow. I would say that the discovery process is really useful up to the point of maybe saying unearth a problem is really useful towards maybe identifying a few different facets of a chatbot, but you probably wouldn't use the ideation workshop or the impact workshop. You would probably from this stage segment off into a realm where you're trying to work on the conversational flow or try to work on persona, something of that nature. Maybe you could go as far as ideation, but I would see that as stopping here. So there's some, I think, software engineering challenges where it's probably going to stop here and segue off, maybe after ideation.
Cool. Thank you. And then let's open it up to the floor. Does anyone else have any comments?
Hello. So I've got a question. So thinking about that statistic that I hear every year, that 80% of data science projects fail for good reasons and bad. What kind of success rates do you have of projects post-discovery phase, and how many, I guess, avoidable bad projects do you prevent because of it?
Well, avoidable bad projects, I'm not sure. That's a tough one to quantify. There's definitely been a few that we've steered away from. You know, in terms of ideas that come out of these workshops, we're talking like, you know, it's anywhere between like 5 and 20 per workshop where people come out and they get prioritized. So, you know, usually it's only 1 to 2 that make it through the workshop and come out the back end. So you're, I guess, if you had to put a number on it, it's maybe like 18 and 20, something like that. something around there, I think you're kind of avoiding. All the projects that I've seen go through this process have been successful. I haven't really seen any that have floundered. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone admit that 80% of their projects fail, but it's I do hear it's a number that gets touted around by the management consultants.
It does get thrown around a lot, yeah. And I think there's a combination of like maybe not so rigorous discovery processes, as well as I think some of that gets thrown around when in conversations around ML ops and difficulty when you're trying to scale as well.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Anyone else has any comments, wants to share maybe how they do discovery at their company and what they learned?
Yeah, hi. This is AK from Zentasa. Henrik, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, hi. So that was a good chat, Brian. Thanks a lot. I think a couple of questions come to mind. The discovery and the process you've laid out is very clear and it's very structured. That's great. What are your thoughts about two things? One, the managed services that has to go hand in hand in order to make those 20% projects succeed. Because as we all know, once the model is developed, it's deployed, it requires a lot of hand holding. Initially, not more because you have to integrate and tweak and come back to the model, find the features and train or retrain, find new things that someone, now they started using it. They may say, oh, what about that email flag? Can we try to use that? Will that improve accuracy? Those kind of things are naturally happening over the course of, first 3 to 6 months. Depending on the size of the project and the impact of it. So what are your thoughts about that managed services? How do you take that forward? And then second point was, once you have, well, let me stop there. That's a loaded question itself. So please.
Yeah. So the question, just make sure I'm getting it right, is how do you manage deployments after the MVP stage? Is that kind of where you're getting at?
Yes.
So
thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So this our middle stage, we time box it at 4 to 6 weeks, which I could imagine with some business units might feel that that's really short, like too short. But the point is to get something out the door, to start proving value as soon as possible. And you're absolutely right. These things live on and they get optimized as they're deployed and as they're used. And it's just something we either hand off to the client, and so we work hand in hand to develop sometimes. So this step, for example, it could be 2 data scientists, one part us, one part them, and we're essentially handing off to them in that process. Other times we do have a managed service division that actually does own processes like this after we leave, and it's just handed over to them. They optimize. We would use systems like Kubeflow or AI platform. We partner a lot with Google, so there could be Kubeflow or something of that nature where you're keeping track of what's going on and adjusting the model as needed. And with more sophisticated systems, we do build mechanisms to automatically retrain. So hopefully I'm answering the question.
Yeah, no, that definitely gets to the things like drift monitoring and keeping the ROC curve in place. And then second thing would be, while you're doing this discovery, are you also spending time to figure out the endpoint activation? Where does this model output live? What does it do? Yes, it's in a BQ table, but then how does it get consumed by whoever's going to consume it, and so on. So any thoughts on that would be also pretty cool.
Yeah, so to be honest, that kind of consideration doesn't really come into the discovery phase, at least. It comes in really here, because that kind of sounds more like a productionization question and something that can be saved until a later stage. Yeah, does that hopefully answer your question?
Okay, yeah, sure, thanks.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks. And then Edgar is the next one to have a question.
Thank you very much, Hendrik. Yeah, I think this topic about the failure, and someone in the chat also say 84% of the projects fail. I think that's one of the things that I'm working for to raise the success. And one of the things I have identified that they failed for is the data. I don't know if your experience it holds that 80% of the time you spend trying to acquire the data to use it the 20% of the time.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that raised my concern, and I work a lot in the area of synthetic data, and some of the predictions from Gartner by 2024, it says that 60% of the machine learning will be trained by synthetic data generated. I just want to know your thoughts about this, probably the failure of the projects and also the use of synthetic data.
Yeah. So when it comes to data availability, that dramatically impacts this entire process for sure. And let me see, I'll go to this slide works. So in terms of data availability, by the impact stage, this is where we kind of address that. And the impact workshop, we try to figure out what's the minimum viable data that you can utilize to get away with a workshop. And we have had to tell people, okay, you need to go back to the drawing board because it's a great solution idea, but realistically, you don't have the right data for this. And synthetic data, I think, is one potential solution for these problems, but it can be challenging. I think we haven't really ended up using synthetic data that much, so I can't comment on that a lot. But my experience with it has been, it's useful, but I think when it comes to machine learning, it can be problematic because, it's giving you an impression and a result that isn't going to reflect the reality of real data ultimately. So I'm always wary of data.
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, I think if you can get your hands on actual data, it's always better. But I think it's a good way to navigate around like privacy concerns. So if there's any legal constraint that actually prohibits you from working with actual data, then synthetic data is a really good solution to try to work around that.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone?
Just
yeah?
Thank you for the answer. And that's what the company I'm working for is trying to come up with ways to break the privacy, but also there are certain domains where you don't get also labeled data, right? Like financial crime. So it's very hard to actually get a quality data set from the real world that tells you all of these transactions are suspicious and all of these are not. And I think the quality of the data, sometimes real data is not better than synthetic data because of these reasons. So just to give you a concept about the domain and work, but I agree with you. It's very hard to actually find quality synthetic data, and that's what we're working for to actually reach that point. Thank you.
That's by the way an interesting question. Do you have any views on like acquiring labels as well, Brandon? So if labels are not available, like do you include like label acquisition in this part as well?
Sorry, was that to me?
Yeah, I thought it was to you.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said Brendan. Sorry, can you say that one more time? Apologies.
Because I was looking in the chat, so I got confused. So this whole point around like label acquisition, right? If you want to do some kind of prediction that hasn't been there before, would you include like any work in order to get labels to create data in this as well? So for example, by having like hand labels or going to like mechanical Turk or something like this.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think that we'd try to address that early on in the discovery workshops in that impact session. It would be a good thing to raise in that kind of minimal viable data where you get your, like, is it worth doing labels, or do you want to go to mechanical Turk? It's actually something that in one project we were looking at, and the question was, which one's better, data provided by Mechanical Turk or something that's automated through a pre-built model. Because, to be really clear on that, it was an NLP workload that was doing speech to text, and the client wanted to understand what the delta was between someone taking dictation and writing it down, and how accurate, what the delta is between that and an NLP API that would be provided through a cloud vendor, for example. So how accurate, how good is it really to use that was the question. And that was one aspect of what we helped them work through in the discovery, in the data science and engineering phase after the discovery workshops.
Cool. Natalia, you raised your hand. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Big fan of this sort of frameworks. So I wanted to ask you how you manage client or stakeholders' expectations in regards to the MVP. Because some applications, especially in the financial sector, they come with, they are associated with a high risk. So sometimes stakeholders are reluctant to say yes to an MVP, even though this might lead us to a better solution in the end. But they are reluctant because of the risk of getting something that's not very accurate, or this kind of thing. I guess shadowing is one way to sort of be on the safe side, but are there any ways that you suggest to manage this sort of like relationship with the stakeholder and convince them for the MVP?
Yeah, so stakeholder management, you're right, it's absolutely key. And I think that's why we try to involve stakeholders that might have, be bottlenecks later down the line, try to involve them really early on, and even in the ideation process. And I know some teams, they do struggle with that because it's sometimes hard to bring those kind of stakeholders in for various reasons, whether that's just, availability, or there's just kind of some skepticism about the need to have them involved in this stage. But what we found is if everybody's involved in this stage, you can start to build up consensus and remove any kind of elements of fear. They can be addressed earlier on, so that once you start to get into actually building the model, those things are minimized. They're reduced before you even begin development. And it also kind of steers you in the direction of models that might be less likely to be blocked. And so that's a big part of this process as well.
And there's a question in the chat from Paul. Paul, do you want to raise it directly as well, or should I? Okay.
Sure. This is Paul from ELAX. I just curious, do you actually get into hard numbers at the outset for our ROI purposes and then track that along the way, or is that more of a under the hood type of a thing that you wouldn't necessarily bother with?
ROI, you wouldn't necessarily, I guess if you're going to try and, you might have some rough estimation of it, but we don't tie hard numbers to it. I think before you start getting into the development stage, because I think you get a good sense of what's going on and validate and plan, but by this stage you haven't built any models. So we wouldn't tie ROI or kind of project what the ROI would be until probably towards the end of the development stage, or maybe somewhere in the middle.
Question from Alex. Do you want to raise it directly?
Yes, I just didn't want to interrupt somebody else. So yes, you were saying about tying these to kind of business metrics to make sure that you're getting the value. Yeah. But yeah, you get this problem. Well, have you ever had the problem of optimizing too closely for something actually means that thing ceases to be a good measure? So maybe an example of that would be something like if you're optimizing towards the number of people that apply to your organization, what you presumably want like high quality people. You don't want like 100 times as many people to apply and then just all of those drop out process because they're not the right kind of people. So I don't know if you have any experience of that.
I haven't personally, but I know what you mean. I can definitely see that would be a concern, and that's a good reason. To me, that highlights why it's good to get more people involved in these processes early on in the discovery phase. So you get people that have had that experience or understand it, like yourself. You get them involved in the impact workshop, where they can where you start to review the viability of an idea, and you can start to flag those risks and mitigate them early on, because it's definitely one worth dealing with. Also, it's a way of, there's a exercise called worst idea, and the example you just gave is actually kind of interesting for a worst idea. So think of the worst idea that could happen, the worst outcome here, and then start to work towards a solution that avoids that. So it could actually, sorry, I think it's just worth calling that out. But short answer is I haven't personally seen that, but there are ways of trying to work towards mitigating it in the discovery phase.
Yeah, I would only add that's also why A/B testing is quite important, so that your machine learning model result that you have like back tested against some data doesn't necessarily always work exactly the same way in production, because there might be some like weird interaction effects. Like recommendation engines is, I think, the prime example for that. And then Adam is, I think, the next person to ask a question. Adam, do you want to ask it directly?
Yes, I can ask it directly. You mentioned quite early on in the talk that there's a risk of data science projects just turning into generic research projects. And I've just moved into data science from doing a PhD in physical chemistry. And I was wondering if you had any sort of tips on how to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of scoping out things early on is a part of this. I mean, if you're kind of just getting started and you're worried about not having the right guardrails, I think time boxing things is really important. And for me, that started with Scrum methodology. And I know not everybody has a positive experience with Scrum, but I kind of had the opposite. I had a very, very positive experience with Scrum early on in my career, and that kind of sold me on a lot of the discipline that it subscribes to. So if you have those kind of guardrails in place, I think it helps a lot. Not saying Scrum is always the right choice, but finding out what those guardrails are is really important. For what we use, I think when it comes to ML, time boxing yourself and sticking to that time limit and kind of moving on, pivoting sooner rather than later can be very useful, because you don't want to get stuck in a rabbit hole. I think that's really the problem that I see a lot.
Thanks very much. Thanks. It's really helpful.
Yeah, what I would add to that, if you do the ROI analysis, oftentimes you get an idea of like how accuracy translates into some kind of monetary value, and then you can see whether you're actually improving like week by week and what the kind of additional value is of spending an additional week on a particular project.
Cool, thanks.
That might also go back to tying it back to a business metric as well, because if you can see the business metric improve, you know that you're kind of heading in the right direction.
Yeah. Any other questions from the group? I'd be really interested if anyone would share their discovery process within an existing organization. So how do you go about it? Like once you're embedded, if you don't come in kind of like externally, does anyone have any thoughts about it that he or she wants to share?
This is AK. Yeah, I can talk about a project we've recently completed at a large UK online electronics retailer, and the most of the project was actually done by on-site, people, their own team, and we were advising them and guiding them through some of the technicalities. The discovery process from our point of view, from many of the See, I think what we're talking about is what Brian, you're presenting is applicable across a wide range of industries and wide range of maturity curves, which I appreciate. And then there are companies which are much more advanced, have done a lot of this, and they've hired their data scientists. In fact, they have, COEs, Center of Excellence, and those kind of organizations within their company that support marketing, e-commerce, customer acquisition, those very specific areas that they want to improve. So what we realize is discovery process in those companies is much different because they are talking about KPIs that they want to improve. They have clear set of KPIs they want to improve, and they go after that with pointed models which are ready to activate, and they run those tests mostly like in an A and B fashion. They run those tests for 6 weeks, find out the results, and move on. So the discovery phase takes more of a business turn at the start to say which area do you want to focus, capture that data, look at the metrics, and then try to improve those metrics by creating. Obviously you have to go through the cycles of what kind of model is required, regression, classification, and so on, and how to deploy it. But once that is figured out, then it's a matter of improving the KPI. Just some experience that might be worth sharing.
Cool, thank you. Anyone else feel like sharing? Walter, I'm pretty sure you've seen a lot of discovery processes. How does this rate against what you've seen before?
I was following along, and I've done very little in machine learning. So, but apart from that, I see a lot of similarities. Someone asked about the success of projects. I do have a counter data point. I remember one place where we actually started to do this sort of structured discovery of business value up front, and it turned out that every project was very, very successful. So nothing fell through. And we were very suspicious of that until we found out that the product as it was simply very, very bad. So it didn't really matter what we did. Everything we did was an improvement. So that was a bit of a disappointment. We worked really hard to become more data driven, and it turned out that it didn't really matter what the hypothesis was, because we were so much more structured that everything actually improved. No, and apart from that, one thing that Byron, that I was wondering about, I'm an agile coach, so the tools you're using, I think it's a wonderful application to the machine learning field of the things that we try to do in agile and often fail. The only thing, of course, that for me then worries me is the cycle time for the development of the initial development of the model, of the MVP, as you put it in the overview. Because 4 to 6 weeks to me sounds as very long, and of course I know that this is a different domain. So what would be possible to shorten that?
To shorten it, yeah, I guess I have seen it done faster. One of the things that this is probably biased towards is an environment where I'm a consultant, right? I go into companies where I don't know the data that well, so you don't always start off from the best position, and I'm sure there's an element of that that's baked into our estimation and experience. I would imagine that if you let's say you're iterating through AccelerateML multiple times and you get to know the data set really well, like, or there's a feature store. I would imagine a lot of this could be trimmed down over time and over iterations. So I don't necessarily think that 4 to 6 weeks is always going to be the case. I think it is a function of time and experience and closeness to the data. And it's definitely biased by the fact that I'm a consultant and I'm coming at it from that angle. So
that really comforts me.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's also like a lot of the time isn't actually spent on the model development itself, right? Most of it is more data acquisition, I guess.
I was just saying, from a delivery perspective, we've had a similar challenge. I've not had a structured process, but I had 3 data scientists working for me. We had no process. We were literally flying blind. I have no idea about data science. I'm here to learn from that perspective. But from a operational perspective, that our data scientists were spending that sort of time building each model, and as Henrik just pointed out, understanding the data, getting that data in a format you can work with. It spends most of the time there, so the time frames look about right. But having a process is actually very useful.
And from what you're saying, then a large part of the work is actually understanding the data and understanding the domain.
Yeah. Well, I had somebody who came in from a medical background with machine learning into banking. He was going, okay, where do I start? We had lots of data buried in logs, pulling that data out and getting it into a structured. And we were a challenger bank, from that perspective. So we had access to lots of stuff, but the reality was that nobody really knew because we were still learning. That's when you get to a corporation, good luck, it's even worse. I think those time savers can be aggressive on a large corporation. They'll be spending more time trying to get the data for you. It depends on the organization size and experience and maturity. There's a whole bunch of unknowns that have to be worked through on that.
Yeah, I think understanding and acquiring the data, which is not like trivial either in lots of cases.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. Any other questions, thoughts? There's another message. Yeah, okay. Thanks for joining, and I understand you want to leave. Are there any other questions, thoughts that people want to share? No. One last thought from myself. Like actually, like feature heuristics or something, just like getting an idea of like what might be valuable data, because you don't know what's valuable before you look at it. Byron, do you have any views on that topic?
Like trying to figure out just understand the shape of your data quickly. Is that what you mean?
Well, I mean, you have like some kind of business problem, and then you try to figure out like what data might actually be relevant.
Right. I think maybe the challenge there is just having your data conveniently all in one place where you could, iterate over it very quickly and kind of match it up to the correct business use case. I haven't like done anything like that, but I've had some discussions about it. There's some thoughts, but nothing concrete.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, then we are at the end of our time as well. I thank you all very much for joining. I very much enjoyed the discussion. Thank you very much for participating. It was really good. And hopefully see you all at the next meetup.
Thanks, Hendrik. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.